Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a few minutes, but we would invite you to introduce yourself in the chat so that we can know who all is here today. We're so excited to have you with us. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Where Mentoring and Youth Mental Health Meet. We're so excited that you were able to join us today. And we again invite you to introduce yourselves in the chat. We hope this will be an interactive session and that there'll be an opportunity to connect with one another. You're welcome to use the chat function throughout. We do have a large group, so ask that you stay muted during the presentations, and then we will have time for questions and answers, as well as some breakout group discussions this morning. So we're really excited to have this conversation with you. This is a collaboration between the Mentoring Partnership and Jewish Healthcare Foundation. It's a 4-part series, and we would invite you to register for our next 2 sessions coming up in April 6th. We have a youth voice panel, and then in May, we'll be having a conversation during Mental Health Awareness Month around the intersections of physical and mental health. So we're excited for those, and we hope that you will join us for those as well. The session will be recorded, so you're welcome to share it with your networks as well. We'll go ahead and get started. I'm Deborah Murdoch with the Jewish Healthcare Foundation, and this is our planning team for the series. I wanted to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves as well. So I will hand it over to Michelle.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. I'm Michelle Thomas, Director of Training and Program Development with the Mentoring Partnership, and I am thrilled for today's conversation. And again, thank you so much for being a part of it. I will pass it over to Sophia.
Awesome. Happy Friday, everyone. I am Sophia Duck. I'm the Training and Engagement Manager for the Mentoring Partnership and very happy to be a part of today's conversation. Looking forward to sharing with you all as part of our conversation later. And now we'll go to Carol because Deborah's had a chance to share.
You're still on mute, Carol.
Hi, everybody. My name is Carol Frazier. I'm with the Jewish Healthcare Foundation. I'm excited to be here today, too, and wish you all a happy Friday and good luck preparing for the cyclone storm that's coming or hopefully might miss us.
So as I mentioned, this is a 4-part series. We started our conversation last month just to kick off looking at why this is so important to look at mentoring and youth mental health, knowing that for many of you working with young people, this is something you experience every day, but youth mental health is something that affects all youth. And we had an opportunity to hear from participants in our last session what they felt the most pressing needs of youth are or have been in the past 3 months. And you can see certainly connection, anxiety, safety, and support came up very often, as well as depression and isolation. So we know that this is something that people who are working with young people are thinking about often and wanted to bring together this conversation series in order to really explore how we can equip youth professionals, as well as parents and mentors and those who care about young people to really provide support during this time. We also welcomed Dr. Allison Silva and Sarah London from the UPMC Adolescent and Young Adult Health or Young Adult Medicine Division, and they work as well as some of the mentors who are working with the Empowering Teens to Thrive program, a youth violence prevention program out of Children's Hospital. And they provided some really great tools for the toolbox to help us be supportive of youth around healing-centered engagement and grounding techniques for mental health support in the moment. So we would invite you to check out the recording from that session for those tips as well, if you weren't able to attend last month. And now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. We have sort of 2 parts to the session. The first part, we're going to be hearing from some community organizations who have woven in teen mental health and wellness into their teen engagement programming. I'm glad to welcome Max River, a first-year fellow with Repair the World. They graduated from University of Pittsburgh in the spring of 2021 with degrees in English literature and Japanese, and started a 2-year Repair Fellowship working with Just Harvest, Grow Pittsburgh, and the Peer Court Teen Program. Over the course of their time with Repair, Max aims to uplift the voices of historically minoritized groups and advocate for equitable treatment of queer and trans youth. We're also excited to welcome a team from Center of Life. Patrick Orman is the development manager. And prior to this role, he was lead editor at a fundraising and marketing firm specializing in nonprofits. Patrick's proud to serve the Hazelwood community at Center of Life because of the people there and the transformations they make every day. And he received his bachelor's from Duquesne University. Kiyomi Knox is a family engagement coordinator at Center of Life. And since she's been there since early 2020. And in this role, Kiyomi uses arts as a means of healing and addressing trauma, using trauma-informed best practices to work with families and leading community members to empowerment. Kiyomi received 2 bachelor's degrees in graphic design and sociology from Clarion University and her master's of social work at Pitt. Okay. We are also, so that will be the first part of our conversation. And then we are glad to welcome Dr. Candace Biernesser, a licensed clinical social worker and behavioral health specialist, who will be leading us in conversation around social media and mental health. She received a MSW and MPH from Tulane University and a PhD from the University of Pittsburgh Graduate School of Public Health, And during her doctoral study, she worked with her longstanding mentor, Dr. David Brent, examining the transmission of suicidal behavior in families and clinical trials focused on adolescent suicide prevention. In her research, she's also investigated the influence of social media experiences on offering risk and protection for adolescent suicide and explored options for social media monitoring that are most acceptable to youth and in line with clinical best practices. She's also the principal investigator for an innovation study that aims to develop a digital suicide prevention intervention for cyberbullied adolescents. So we're looking forward to that conversation, and we'll provide some opportunity after her presentation for some breakout group discussions to hear from all of you as well. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Max to kick us off and share some of the work that they are doing at Repair the World.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Deborah, for that wonderful introduction. Just really thrilled to be here spending this beautiful Friday with you all. Similar to what Carol mentioned, I really hope the cyclone misses us because I've already warmed up to spring, but nonetheless, hopefully this conversation will be warming as well. So hopefully we'll be able to, start the weekend off strong with some warmness and kindness, not only to ourselves, but then also to our youth, of course. So let's see, would you mind going to the next slide, please? So I'm here from Repair the World Pittsburgh. We were founded in 2013 specifically to mobilize Jews and their communities to take action to pursue a just world and inspiring people to serve and to serve throughout their entire lives. One of our key tenets, we believe that service and support of social change is vital to flourishing the Jewish community and an inspired Jewish life. We have a very big goal of inspiring and catalyzing 1 million acts of service towards repairing the world. Our work is grounded in Jewish values like Tikkun Olam, which is repairing the world, and we specifically meet pressing local needs in Pittsburgh through doing volunteer outreach, having volunteers mobilize to connect their service specifically with learning around those service and social justice issue areas and exploring that, all of that as Jewish values as intertwined to Jewish values. We support other nonprofits and we also help deepen connections throughout our communities, aiming to build a stronger, more united community throughout Pittsburgh in general. We are also a national nonprofit, so Pittsburgh is just one of our many satellite cities. I would be happy to move to the next slide, please. Awesome. So this is just a little diagram of our core 7 values, which are also Jewish values. They all kind of center around this concept of repairing the world, of course, but in all of our work, we really try to uplift justice, tzedek, the preciousness of each human, kavod habrichot, strengthening each other, hitkazkut, solidarity, akdut, action and learning, naaseh v'nishma, and a both and perspective, ilu ve'ilu. And through embodying all of these values, we aim to have our work be both, of course, ethically and morally sound, but then also, approaching service and approaching care through a more holistic perspective, acknowledging that whenever we have specifically youth showing up to our spaces to serve and or learn, that they do have many other aspects of their life going on at the same time. So we really try to care for all aspects of people as humans and acknowledge that. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please. So specifically to spotlight just a few of our programs, we do many different programs. Myself as a first-year fellowship participant, my day-to-day work looks very different depending upon the day. On some days it involves refurbishing beautiful old Pittsburgh mansions from the inside out that will become transitional housing. I also do a lot of gardening, specifically with Grow Pittsburgh, and as you see on the screen, the Sheridan Avenue Orchard and Garden. Sheridan Avenue Orchard and Garden is it's a small little garden located in East Liberty, right next to the East End Cooperative Ministry, right by Target and Home Depot. And this space is a totally open gardening space. Anyone can come at any time of day. And if they're in need of food, they can essentially just pick the food right off the vine, right off of the tree, and have that right then and there. Historically, we've grown hundreds of pounds of produce and donated it to the East End Cooperative Ministries food pantry. And through having this collective gardening effort, we're not only inspiring youth, so specifically teens and folks of all ages, to get involved in their community gardens, learning more about here's how we can ethically and sustainably grow produce to feed our communities. But then it's also learning about, okay, let's think about gentrification throughout Pittsburgh. Let's think about food apartheid throughout Pittsburgh, and how through having initiatives such as these to have sustainable and accessible gardens and farms, that this is essentially working to combat those really like negative influences. So that's one of our programs. Next on the list, Peer Corps. Peer Corps, I'll talk a little bit more at length because it's actually a program that I help coordinate. It's specifically geared towards youth, so middle school through high school, sixth grade through 12th grade, and it's a service learning program where we bring in different representatives from local nonprofits and take youth through some service learning and through a Jewish lens, of course, to see how can we address different social justice issues that are impacting everyone throughout Allegheny County and beyond, that kind of thing. Next on the list is Service Corps. Service Corps is another youth engagement service learning program. This one's geared towards a slightly older age range, so typically 18 through 30. And Service Corps is a semester-long service program where essentially folks will be paired with a local nonprofit and do approximately 10 hours of service per week. And it's a great way for folks to become connected not only to the nonprofit realm, but to, you know, have fantastic skill building, to do some networking, to get out in the world and have experiences that they wouldn't have necessarily had otherwise. So that's a little bit what Service Corps is. The fellowship, I'm one of the fellows. The fellowship is a 2-year long program, and essentially I'm working full-time supporting 2 nonprofits. I support Just Harvest and Grow Pittsburgh, respectfully, for different quantities of time per week. And then I'm also coordinating Peer Corps, also engaging with repairs, national staff, and also local staff to coordinate different programming, whether it be hands on the ground gardening, service learning in that sense, or if it's working through larger national campaigns to consider topics like what we're considering today. How is teen mental health being approached, or how is it fluctuating given today's circumstances of just the world and society, and how can we show up in more effective ways for our youth, that kind of thing. The last on that list, so Repair Families. Families programming is geared towards all ages. And the idea behind having this families programming is that this will engage not only adults in Jewish service learning and learning about different social justice issues, but thinking that let's introduce children from as young of an age as possible to volunteering and to direct service and all of the really positive impacts that can have not only on your community, but then also on yourself and your own development, that kind of thing. Would you mind going to the next slide, please? Awesome. So like I mentioned, I'll talk a little bit more at length about PeerCorps Middle and High School, just to share a little bit of the current structure of the program. We have it broken down into learning sessions. So high school will have a learning session, middle school will have a learning session. The content will vary a little bit in accordance to what's appropriate for the age group. And basically during those learning sessions, I bring on representatives from different nonprofits that we work with. So more recently, we've been working with the Hugh Lane Wellness Foundation to talk about LGBTQIA+ justice. A little bit back in February, we did a partnership with One Hood Media specifically to talk about racial justice in Pittsburgh. And then in the past, we've also partnered with Grow Pittsburgh. We've also partnered with as of course, the coffee has not kicked in yet, clearly. We partner with a whole variety of different nonprofit organizations that work in all sorts of different areas, from environmental justice to food justice to housing justice. So those are just a sampling of some of the topics we try to explore in our programming. The last component to the program, we have a day of service. So first we start with that learning component, then we try to solidify that learning through doing hands-on direct service with the nonprofits. So what some of our service projects have looked like in the past. We have had workshops with writing image descriptions to increase accessibility for Repair the World Pittsburgh. We have been curating an art show that's currently on display in the East End Cooperative Ministry. Definitely check it out if you're interested. We've also we've done hands-on gardening, and for the month of March with Hugh Lane, we're currently running a really fantastic mutual aid supply drive of all kinds of supplies that will go directly to youth that are served by Hugh Lane. Would you mind going to the next slide, please? So like I mentioned, we have these learning sessions and service sessions that relate to specific social justice issue areas, and we're working on the ground with Pittsburgh organizations to try to further the really amazing work that they're doing. And here are just 3 of the Jewish values that we feel are really solidified through the work that we do through PeerCorps. So tzedek, justice, really valuing that our humanity as individuals and as a collective is bound up in the humanity of others. Ilu ve'ilu, both and, that we need to learn alongside others and consider the both ands of all situations, kind of grappling with that complexity. And then the last one, tikkun olam, taking action to create a better world, that kind of thing. Would you please go to the next slide? Awesome. And so that's all I have for my shortened version of this spiel. I can of course talk more at length about specific projects and initiatives that we've done. If anyone's interested in hearing more about some of the work that we've done historically with PeerCorps, or some of the programs that we are planning to do. We have really exciting programs coming up for Purim. We're doing lots and lots of mutual aid supply drives, and on March 17th, we'll be doing a really lovely Purim supply packing party, which will be in person, safely outside, with snacks, which is exciting. And the supplies that we've been gathering for that will be going towards a whole bunch of nonprofits. Zakaya House, which specifically addresses recidivism and houselessness, and creating support networks for folks who are coming out of the carceral system. We're also, our supplies are going towards our friends at Center of Life, I believe, and then also Sisters Pittsburgh. And I'm trying to think if I'm forgetting one other organization. I may be, and if I am, I apologize. If you're interested in more information though about that event or any of the other events that we're running, please check out our website. It's werepair.org/Pittsburgh. But again, just really happy to be here and to be chatting with y'all. And yeah, if you have any specific questions about anything, please don't hesitate to ask. I'll also put my email in the chat in case if anyone wants to reach out to me personally. So awesome. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. So we'll hold questions until after we hear from Center of Life, and then there'll be some time for more questions and discussions around how these programs really connect to and are supporting youth mental health. So I'd like to invite Kiyomi and Patrick to share a little bit about the work that they're doing at Center of Life.
Sure. So I'm just going to go ahead and share our presentation here. Okay, everyone can see the screen okay?
All right. Hi, everybody. Good morning. I hope you're having a good Friday morning. Hope you have a great weekend. And like Max said, I hope we do not get this snowstorm because I'm frankly tired of it. You know, scraping off the car in the morning is probably one of my least favorite activities. But anyways, thank you for having us, and I'll be glad to speak to you about, you know, our efforts in teen mental wellness. But it's a larger story because we really started it with through our family engagement program. We started a mental wellness program through that program under the tutelage of Dr. Bruce Rabin, and Dr. Bruce really worked with our participants at that point were mostly single mothers, and mostly single mothers who, you know, had dealt with various traumas, and you know, he had noticed that you know, they had been treating their children improperly, you know, scolding them constantly, and this went for single mothers and mothers to be as well. And so he ran, I think it was an 8-week pilot program through our family engagement program, where he took the mothers through a host of meditation and mindfulness trainings and taught them about it as well. Taught them about how it could affect them anatomically, how it could affect the baby, how it could affect their child. And what we noticed throughout those 8 weeks was that the mothers began to be a lot more calm during the meetings. There were a lot less distractions. When they brought their kids in, you know, when we always have child care for those programs. So when they would bring the kids in, you know, at first, a lot of the moms would be, you know, yelling at their child. Over those 8 weeks, they really noticed that they weren't yelling at their child anymore. It was very much a calm discussion with the child if the child was behaving improperly. So it really did a lot. And while Dr. Bruce was more interested in mothers and in that kind of realm and that population, we thought, well, it could probably work for teens. And there was some, you know, good data that backed that up from what we had found, you know, just on the internet, some old studies. And so we figured the perfect place for this program to keep moving alongside of the family engagement program would be within our CRUNK program. And so we began to run, you know, I'm gonna let Kiyomi talk about a little bit more of the details, but we used to run this, we began running it through our CRUNK program, and Kiyomi learned under Dr. Bruce, and Kiyomi was once actually my intern, and then she told me she hated me, and she went and said, you know, she didn't want to raise any more money, and even though she was really good at it, and then she said, I'm going to actually use my degree, and she was way too valuable, so we kept her here at Center of Life. And that's totally in jest. She didn't say that to me, but actually I have another intern right now, or not, she's a full-time employee now who was an intern, who's also from the master's program of social work at Pitt. And so if anyone knows anyone, we could use another intern about this time because the grants are coming hot and heavy. But yeah, so we decided to run this through our CRUNK program. And what we found was that, you know, I at first, to be honest and to be frank, I didn't really think that this would be successful with teens. I knew what it was like to be a 13, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old and talk about meditation. And I always thought it was someone there with their legs crossed at that point in my life and, you know, humming. And so I was like, this, you know, this is going to be a wash for us. I mean, we'll try it, sure. And surprisingly, what we found and that I found in my life, prior to starting this, when I began to do these things as an older person, it really helped me focus. It really helped me calm down after the day, not to think about the other things on the outside world, but to think about me on the inside. And so when we ran it with the teams, no one really knew what was going to happen. And surprisingly, the teams really took to it. They began to ask for, alternate ways of doing it, new practices. What else can we do? And so it really became a positive thing for our teams. And it's something that we're continuing, something that is growing throughout the organization as well, into other programs. Figuring out ways to introduce it to smaller children is a priority for us in the coming months. When you have a pandemic combined with all of the social and racial justice issues that our country's experienced over, not just the past 2 years, but the past 200 years, and all those things come to a head at once, you've really created a bad mixture of things, combined with the people that we regularly serve who routinely test with high ACEs scores, and who routinely are faced with things day to day that maybe you and I aren't thinking about or don't affect us as much. And so the teams are at that age where they have the intellectual ability to begin to think a lot more deeply, to feel a lot more deeply, and these issues come to a head. And while we were able to manage those problems throughout the years, now we're taking a little bit more direct action on those problems and helping them and providing them with coping mechanisms. So with that said, Kiyomi, you can take it away here.
Thanks, Pat. So this is Kiyomi. So I run the Family and Community Engagement Program over here at Center of Life. My pronouns are she, her. For those that might need the description, I am an Asian American woman. I'm wearing a black and yellow sweater. I have glasses and dangly earrings, and I have long dark hair, but I have it pulled up at the moment. And you might see my furry little cats come across the screen. So I apologize in advance, or, I celebrate that with you if you're like me and you really get excited by those things with working at home. But I'm really jazzed, a little bit of a pun intended, about talking about the crunk movement with y'all. So I like to joke that, in terms of like when I was in high school, I always see like the crunk kids as like the students that I would have been too intimidated to approach, or I couldn't sit with them at lunch because I just find them so cool. I'm really excited to present the program to y'all. So our CRUNK program stands for Creating Realistic Urban New School Knowledge. And it was started in the early 2000s as part of Center of Life programming, and it recruits students in grades 9th and up all across Allegheny County. So here you can see some pictures of our CRUNK students performing, and they use elements of jazz and hip hop, dance and production and equipment management to help facilitate multiple professional skill sets, as well as give space for students to express themselves to their peers and communities through performances. So here you can see, this is actually our Jimmy Six band here in the top left-hand corner. So you can see the elements of jazz there. Here in the middle and down in the left-hand corner, you can see our elements of dance. And then here in the right-hand bottom corner, this is actually our junior CRUNK program. So this is when some of our CRUNK staff and some of the older students, they come in and they mentor some of our middle school students. So this is a couple of the middle school students learning how to do production. So I just want to quickly highlight some key takeaways of the CRUNK movement and why it's so awesome in terms of working with mental wellness. So the CRUNK movement is a student-led initiative, right? So it's a student-led music and health initiative that uses the elements of hip hop to communicate positive messages about current events and mental health to peers. Like we talked about in the previous slide, they're learning to dance, they're learning to MC, record and produce music, as well as perform live shows and create their own music videos, which we're going to watch in a little bit, which is really exciting. And they do this while they're earning a salary. So that's one of the really unique things about the program is they're not just enrolled in an after-school program, they're actually, it's a career. So they're learning career opportunities. The movement is designed as a micro enterprise production company, which means it's teaching our students how to start and run their own musical business while also giving them the skill sets and professional experience to succeed in the music industry. In fact, the program boasts many successful graduates. Some of our graduates have toured all over the world. They've played shows in Japan, they've won Grammys, or they're still performing and doing advocacy locally here in Pittsburgh. For example, Treble NLS with One Hood Media is a Crunk alum. One director of the program stated, quote, "We're big advocates for teaching the students to be in control of their own economy and how to value their craft so they can be in control of this in the future as artists. Most importantly, though, the Crunk movement offers space and creative outlet for youth to express themselves, create resilience, and celebrate their identity." So one of our students shared, quotes, "We've been taught so much about what is healthy, like the right kind of food and what we should put into our bodies and how to take care of it. But what we should be taught is what do we put in our spirits?" And Crunk really allows there to be discussion around that. What are we going to put into our spirits so we can feed and nourish others that are coming and listening to our music and being a part of our events? Music and health go hand in hand because music is a release. So I wanted to show a few different examples of the work that they're doing and how they're using hip hop as a tool for expression. So in this first music video that we're going to watch together, it's titled 60s. And we hear the students discuss how the climate in America is still like that in the 60s, how they are still seeing the same issues and struggles. And keep in mind, so this music video was filmed in 2017. So that was 2017, and think about what happened just 3 years afterwards. And then think about what we're going through today and how these things keep on repeating.
Fist in the air like a sausage, yeah. 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 Fist in the air like the 60s, stuck in the past. They haven't protested my city. How long will it last? They killing my people on camera. Who's gonna police the police? Nobody's protecting the streets. They force us to live in defeat. So that's why I got my fist in the air like the 60s. Stuck in the past. They haven't protested my city. How long will it last? This killing stuff happen too often. See it on TV, I'm tired of watching. When they gon' stop it? Stop all that nonsense. All melanin is the source of which causes it. It makes me sick to my stomach, I'm coughing. When I see another black man in the coffin, I'm being honest. No, they don't want this. God gave me beautiful skin, I'm applauding. So we just discussed how the comparison of social justice issues hasn't really changed. And this video that we're about to watch was made in the summer, right at the height of the protests and the response in solidarity with the Black Lives Matters movement. And this one is called Wartime, and this is by one of our artists named Shoota Shack.
Criticize my skin, but it's something they wish for. Tell us don't move, I can get on the floor, wanna walk with my skin, but can't in my shoes. If I listen or fight, either way I'm gonna lose. Back and forth, they've been going back and forth, back and forth. They've been trying to break my people, put us down, but we are the kings and queens. Wear your crown. Wartime, yes, wartime. Let's the boots up, get your crew up, throw your fist up. We are next up, time to vest up, keep your head up. Wartime, yes, wartime. Let's the boots up, get your crew up, throw your fist up. We are next up, time to vest up, keep your head up. We are up next, yes, we are the destiny coming together. They should get, they better be. There is no peace, so there is balance. Not talking equality, talking some nonsense. Lost enough, but we bossing up. Skin is thick, cause the road is tough, but we still got time. We don't need no luck. We gon' shout all day and don't give up. Wartime, yes, wartime. Let's the boots up, get your crew up, throw your fist up. We are next up, time to vest up, keep your head up. Wartime, yes, wartime. Let's the boots up, get your crew up, throw your fist up. We are next up, time to vest up, keep your head up.
In this last music video that we're going to watch, so in the last two videos that we watched, you could hear the students discuss their resilience and how they are finding themselves through times of war in their own communities. In this next video, which is titled Black Girls Rock, the students discuss and celebrate their identities and dedicate this song to their love and admiration of Black women everywhere.
What? What? Hey, yo, Danger. Girl, you must be mixed. Loose curls, pretty eyes, it just don't make sense. Riding fun, but take the black off my back like a whip. Dare, angry Black woman, take your hand from your hip. Yeah, you know I like the weave, the fresh acrylic nails, but don't spit like it's your roots like everyone can't tell. All we do is self-hate, the fans are top like a sis. Name it what you are, I'm Black the last one on your list. Okay, so we'll pop a bar from both forever hating. Out with the unity, accomplishments are shining. Speech and bad demand, they don't think we educated. If you claim it's still a virgin, then they gon' think you're crazy. They just don't make so much. We prove them wrong with a proper cause, no one can't resist. Addicted like we are. Generational, never breakable, inspirational, yeah, that click. Spiritual, I'm melanist, yeah, empty hand, I can't touch this, yeah. Where my girls at? Bring them in. Bring them in. Got the melanin popping up in her skin. Where my girls got intelligence. BG magic, we got it until the end.
Okay, and so to wrap up from the Crunk students, I just wanted to leave you with words from the students themselves about their experiences with Crunk to best summarize why this program is so important to them and creates joy and strength in them.
I'm Simba.
I am Alea, but they call me Bird.
I'm Alonzo Cotton. My stage name is Mojo. I feel like Crunk inspires a lot of people. It definitely inspires me. I like to evoke certain emotions from people with my music. I love to express myself. If I'm mad, happy, or whatever, I express myself in different ways. And I feel like music is that platform to do it.
And I try to put myself in other people's shoes, tell other people's stories, stuff that people are afraid to talk about, like especially teenagers. So I'm trying to make that type of music. And they'll be like, yo, I'm actually going through this, but I can't say nothing because then people are gonna look at me weird. So I put myself in their shoes and I'm like, I'll take the risk for all of you guys.
I just do it for that kid. I just hope, like, when I get big, I inspire people. I came here with the sense of making money. I want to do music for the money. But then, as I learned from Luke and everyone else here is teaching us, when it comes to music, it isn't about the money. The money's just a bonus. Making people feel good is my #1 goal from the music. I want people to connect with me, with my music and my sound. I don't want the music to always be about me. I want to tell a story, but at the same time, connect with the person who's out there in Europe somewhere, Atlanta, wherever.
I want to be the rapper that I wanted to look up to.
Like, I want to find me. You got one life. Why don't you live it to the fullest and help everybody you can?
Yeah, so truly it makes my heart feel like it's going to burst with admiration for these students, right? You just got to see how creative and talented they are. And I'm always standing in awe of how they're able to use hip hop as a way to find themselves and create change. If you haven't had an opportunity to see them in person, 10 out of 10 recommend. It is absolutely a must. I'm sure this summer, so last summer, we were privileged enough to be able to have staged presence in our community. So our Crunk students were down there and our jazz students were working with them as well, doing summer concerts. So I'm sure that's something that we're going to be looking to do again this summer. Last time we were set up right next to the library. We also had our big finale show down on Hazelwood Green. So please follow us. Here's some other places where you can follow the Crunk students and come out and check out a performance, because we would love for you to be able to see all of these things that they're doing yourself.
Thank you, Kiyomi and Patrick. We have some time for questions, so I want to open it up for questions for Max as well as Kiyomi and Patrick. If you have any, please feel free to put them in the chat, or you're also welcome to simply unmute yourself and ask any question you might have.
I have a quick question. How do students get involved in either of your programs? Is it like an online application? Do they have to, I don't know, just tell me whatever you can help me with. And I work for a online charter school. So, but we do have about, I think, maybe 200 students in Allegheny County. So
for Crunk, I can field that question. For Crunk, they do audition for their positions, but I want to make it clear that they're not all performing students. Some students are gifted in, stagecraft or dancing or beat making, or they can learn to beat make, writing for our rappers and performers, or MCing, equipment management. So there's a host of different positions within Crunk: graphic design and graphic art and photography and videography. They can be interested in that. And those aren't necessarily auditioned positions. They would just need to take an interest in it, and we would provide the training with our staff for those students. And I know they're enrolling students now. There's a big recruiting push right now within Crunk. And so on our website, you can contact the Crunk coordinators and their managers and set up some time to enroll. And I believe it's a pretty easy enrollment form actually too, so that the students can do it themselves if they are 18 years old at that point.
I can jump in next. Similarly, with Repair and all of our programming, including Peer Corps, we've kept it open enrollment, so anyone can come and join in our programming at any point, really. Our application process is very simple. We don't turn anyone away. If you just go to our website, werepair.org/Pittsburgh, we have a whole list of all of our upcoming events. We have a calendar. We also have like a snapshot of things that are happening. Thank you so much, Michelle, for putting that in the chat. But yeah, we try to keep it very accessible. We've even had some youth who will just come to our different, we're starting back up Monday night gardening sessions at the Sheridan Avenue Orchard and Garden. Folks will sometimes just come by and say, I want to do service today, and if we're there, we're always able to accommodate. So we try to keep it very simple. Anyone can come and join, basically.
I had a question for all of you. I'm curious what's been most helpful for you as staff and your teams in working with young people in helping them to process current events and helping them to, within your programs, bring up tough topics that might be impacting their mental health. What's been most helpful to you as adult mentors who have such great connections with the youth that you serve?
For over here at Center of Life, I mean, really, it's just about giving people space, giving them the space and the outlet to be able to do that, and being able to allow them space to express themselves in multiple different ways. So it isn't just, we have vibe sessions is what we call them. And so Devon and I, who's the assistant coordinator, we'll work with Crunk to kind of have these sort of sit down like round tables, just like check-ins to see how everyone's doing, but also recognizing that everyone might not be comfortable talking about what's going on, whether it's in the world or at home or in their lives. So we also offer like artistic outlets, or, just Crunk in itself, allowing them to just express themselves through their music or through their dance. For example, we have one student who, when you meet them, seems very, very shy. They're sort of like a very tall, gentle giant, but when they get behind the mic, I mean, their presence is just so amazing, and the things that they talk about. So I think just allowing people space and allowing them different ways to express themselves is really how we've been working with our teens.
Definitely similar approach over here at Repair. For all of our programming, we really take our run of shows and our agendas as like a loose guide. If teens show up and they're not feeling what we want them to talk about or do or anything like that, we adjust. There have been many meetings that I facilitated virtually and in person where folks are just feeling really burned out, whether it be from Zoom, whether it be from just life in general. And we will just do what the teens want to do. And oftentimes by following their lead and really like listening and taking their agency as like paramount, that really ends up making for even more positive and even more impactful sessions. And even if the things that the teens want to do, if it's like watching videos on YouTube about like their interests in like different video games and that kind of thing, it always ends up tied back to some element of the topic that we were initially discussing. So for example, with One Hood Media back in February, we were doing a little exercise in helping build out this curriculum for One Hood for their Divergence program, which essentially is connecting youth to resources around like different creative ways and positive ways to explore their own identities and different like ways to address concerns of mental and physical health, that kind of thing. And part of what the teens brought forward was we had this exercise of if folks had to do a project for the Divergence program or just a project in their life about something they were passionate about, we encouraged them, like, what would you envision that project would look like? We had folks who came forward with, they wanted to do everything from look into RC car communities on the internet, all the way to, on the other end of the spectrum, doing art and envisioning an art piece that they would create. So we really try to let the teens have that agency and lead in the programming that we do, because we recognize it's not only great for relationship building and leadership building, but it's also calling back to the skill building part of our work, and also encouraging teens to have really like agency over themselves, over their lives and that kind of thing. So that's a little bit about that.
Thank you. Michelle has a question.
Thank you. I had a question for Patrick and Kiyomi. Patrick, you led talking about like the Family Engagement Center, and I think the mindfulness work that you were doing with the parents, and then you kind of factored it into the Crunk program. What did that look like? I know you mentioned just kind of at that age, you weren't sure like how that was going to pan out. Is that how sessions began then moving forward, or how was that embedded?
There was, like a physical plan of how we were going to do it. And I believe it began in the summertime because that's where the students had the longest days. And it's pretty hard to be creative for 8 hours a day. And we go for 6 weeks throughout the summer. And so our summer, I don't know how they do it, to be honest with you. Like the students come in at 9 and they work till 4. And then on Thursdays, they come in at 12 and they work till 8 because their concert is that night, and they do a concert every single week. And so throughout the summer, we didn't even used to have air conditioning like when I started here. And so like you can imagine that like all these factors, like about that 4th week is where things are starting to get really good in terms of the productivity and creativity, and really nasty in terms of we're starting to get that burnout feeling. And so what we did was like gather those students in the beginning of the day and run those exercises. And then it kind of like calmed them down, like, getting off the bus or being driven here or driving here themselves early in the morning for a teen. And then kind of just having them have that time to like reset and settle down and get control of themselves. And then open up those vibe sessions after that, where it's more of a group session, where they're talking freely, which they do daily within Crunk. And so that's how it kind of began. And then as they started to do those things, you know, some other students would ask, like, what else can we do? Like this is probably not the only thing, you know what I mean? And so they began to do, you know, like, I forget what kind of exercises they were doing. I have it written in a couple of reports, but you know, exercises of like letting go from the past, or you know, that would allow them to let go from things in their past that were traumatic to them. They constantly thought about, or art projects like Kiyomi said, that kind of a lot of people we realized Kiyomi's like a really great presenter in terms of bringing art into that space, into the mental wellness space, and allowing people who maybe don't want to like talk to someone or look at them or converse with a larger group. They can kind of do something with their hands, and they don't necessarily need to say anything to anyone, but they can begin to think about, you know, as Kiyomi guides it and leads it. And I know she's done a couple, you know, with many of the people in this group. And so we started to do those things with the students.
Thank you.
A question about Crunk. I think you mentioned they're paid for their participation. So is that like, are you a Learn and Earn? Is that through Learn and Earn, or where does the funding come from to pay them? And is it only summertime, or is it throughout the school year also?
No, it's throughout the year. And it is not Learn and Earn. We raise all of it. And so, yeah, it's a hefty pool. And Kiyomi has seen both sides of that, because she was in fundraising with me before she moved into her position now as an intern, and when she was an intern with me. And so, yeah, we do raise all of that money for them. And you know, we budget for, you know, a certain number of students, but we've never really turned anyone away in that instance. The only reason we would ever turn anyone away, and I can't remember really when we did it, was if they didn't have like the musical chops, so to speak, and they wanted to be a performer. There were certain years where there were so many students that wanted to just perform when other students needed to take like an active role in maybe some other kind of program, or sharpen their skills too. And if they want to sharpen their skills, they can always join our jazz program, which works with students, not just in groups, but one-on-one in refining those skills. And that's where a lot of our students come from, is from our, you know, our lower school type of jazz program. And so, yeah, they're paid throughout the year, and it's hourly. And so, yeah, it's a lot of money from I'm a development person. So it's like, yeah, it's a lot.
Well, thank you all. It's so great to hear about the work that you're doing, and spur a lot of creativity and thinking about how we can support young people in different ways. And I love what you said, Max, about letting them lead and have agency in doing that, and finding opportunities to do that in your programs. And it sounds like both of you have really done that in creative and innovative ways. So Patrick and Kiyomi and Max have all said it's okay to share their contact information, so we can do that. And then certainly feel free to continue to connect in the chat. We did want to take just a few minutes to hear from all of you and thinking about, we know you all are also working in some really innovative and creative programs supporting youth. And so did want to hear a little bit more about what you hope to continue to do to support youth mental health in your programs. So we have a little Menti poll. See, Sarah, if you want to just share directly from the Menti, we could do that. In the chat, there's a link to connect. But we wanted to ask you, what are some things that you plan to continue doing within your current work to promote mental health and wellness in your programs? We heard about service learning and the arts and fellowship sessions. So we're curious to hear from others what's happening in your space. So the Menti poll, you can either do through your web browser and enter in the code that's listed there, 698005990, or you can use the QR code that's on the screen. So hoping to continue time in person with teens. Yeah, I think we've all been anxious to continue that and how much that really contributes to mental health and wellness. We haven't talked much about the physical wellness initiatives, but certainly that plays an important role. Partnerships with youth serving organizations, open communications around mental health. I think creating safe space is something that many organizations strive to do and really promotes mental health and wellness. If anyone's having trouble with the link, you're also welcome to add your thoughts into the chat and we can add them. Feel free to do it directly in the Zoom chat as well. The simply checking in and listening is a really powerful tool. These are great. So the next question we wanted to ask is if there's anything that you'd like to start doing that maybe isn't currently happening within your organization or in your program that you might like to start doing to promote mental health and wellness among teens. And this is using the same Menti code and link. I don't know if folks are having trouble accessing the code. Paying youth, starting to pay youth, certainly that we know work contributes to mental health and wellness, and being recognized in that way is really important. Providing reassurance and developing a routine. Open hours, so great. Adding art to programs to incorporate healing, assist in adjudicated dependence, and identifying networks to support them. It's a really important point. I think in our first session, we talked a lot about the networks of care and connecting with different support persons is so important for youth. Partnerships with more organizations and putting together events catered to teen wellness. So building collaborations across youth serving organizations. Certainly you all have a lot to share with one another from your experiences. And then the last question we wanted to ask was just if there's anything that you would look to stop doing that would contribute to promoting mental health and wellness. Is there anything within your programs that maybe isn't the help that you would anticipate it would be? being too academic with teens, rather let them feel their programs. They've already been in school for long periods of time. It's a good point. I think Patrick had talked to us once about not just explaining how mindfulness can be helpful, but actually doing the exercise is an important experiential approach, because they don't necessarily have the energy to listen to why it might be helpful. Stop assuming that we know best or what they need. Certainly letting youth lead. Well, thank you all for sharing these ideas. We hope that hearing from Max and Kiyomi and Patrick spurred some thinking in your own work and your own programs, and how you are probably already promoting mental health and wellness, even if it's not sort of the traditional treatment interventions that we might think of for mental health. But so much of the work that you do really does connect to mental health and wellness. And so we're glad to have that opportunity to think about that with you, and also to hear from 2 community organizations that have really been thinking about that as well. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and shift to our conversation about social media and mental health. And I'd like to invite Dr. Candace Mirnesser to share with us. Candace, I did introduce at the beginning of the session, provide a little bit of your background, but feel free to share a little bit more and get us started.
Sure. It's wonderful to have a chance to talk with all of you. It was really exciting to hear about all the different work that you're doing in the community. So I'm Candace Mirnesser. I'm a postdoc in the Department of Psychiatry at Pitt. I focus around adolescent suicide prevention and also social media experiences among teens. I do a lot of work that's like participatory research with teens, of actually including them in the process of research, particularly around designing interventions. So I'm going to be talking with you today in kind of a broad topic of teen social media use, cyberbullying, and mental health. And it's really toward the goal of building understanding to create a safe and supportive environment for teens. And of course, we care about that online and offline, and I'm mostly focusing on online environments today. So in way of agenda, there's going to be 3 brief little topics here. What is social media's impact on mental health and suicide risk among teens? Next, I'll focus more specifically on cyberbullying. And then lastly, what can we do as adults within the community, as parents or other trusted people, to be helpful in supporting teens to have a safe and supportive online environment? We'll talk first about social media and mental health among teens. So we all have different perspectives on when we think about social media use among teens. And certainly some of us, when we think about this, thinking about things in balance of thinking of, yes, there are potentially positive aspects of social media, but there's all these negative ones. We think of social media as maybe something that is more destructive in nature. Other people think of social media as something that maybe is like a disruptive form of innovation, that in the way that like when TV and other forms of media came out, it's just another way in which we can communicate, and maybe some new ways in which we can communicate. It's not necessarily good or bad, it's about how you use it. So I wanted to acknowledge that we might all have different perspectives toward this topic. And especially, there's a lot of things that have come out in the news recently, especially when we think about things we've heard about Facebook and Instagram and girls' mental health and so forth. It's been something that's on a lot of our mind. And so I also wanted to take a step back and just say, what do we know from research on this topic? So I wanted to acknowledge that most large-scale studies with youth have found that the frequency of social media use has little impact on adolescents' mental health and well-being. I'm highlighting one study here. There's a number of them. This is one from Orban and Perluski from 2019, and they essentially pulled together a lot of large scale data, social data sets. It was like over 300,000 kids, and they essentially found that the association between digital technology use and adolescent well-being is negative, but small, explaining at most 0.4% variation well-being. So essentially what that means is that there is potential for that social media and digital technology use can have a negative impact on well-being, but that it's really only explaining a very small amount of that. And essentially there could be a lot of other factors that are impacting adolescents' well-being. And that's something that we have seen even during COVID. I think a lot of us probably have heard and just witnessed that teens were using a lot more social media, especially at times when, we had to spend a lot more time at home, couldn't go out and actually interact with people as much. And some folks, this is Craig Sewell and some others that are at Pitt, did a study in which they looked at objectively measured technology use. So they actually had teens upload their screen time usage over the course of the pandemic and complete a bunch of questionnaires about mental health. And they found that it's not something that is associated with increases in depression, anxiety, or suicidal ideation over time. And I'm just talking about their screen time, kind of the amount of time they were spending online. And I think here I wanted to differentiate between social media use and experiences. So what we're finding is that social media experiences may be more influential to youth mental health than just the amount of time that they're spending online. So this is a study from Russell Viner and others from 2019, and they essentially also looked at a very large amount of data from youth in England, and they, similarly to other people, found just the amount of time the kids were spending online was not associated with differences in mental health. But when they looked at certain things that can happen when we're using a lot of social media or spending more time online, like exposure to cyberbullying, use that could impact one's sleep or physical activity, we did see an impact on mental health and well-being. And essentially these were like mediating factors. And I think this is what a lot of people have found, that sometimes it's those specific experiences that can make an impact. And I wanted to acknowledge that. And also, when we think a little bit more in the social media experience space, what do we know about that in terms of how it impacts adolescents? Suicide risk is, of course, something that we all care a lot about. So these are some really high level summaries of some research in this area. The first two are some research that we've done. One is a review of the literature, and the other one is a focus group study in which we talked with youth at suicidal risk to really kind of understand from their perspective. And one kind of cool thing from this is that you can notice that sometimes when we actually talk with youth, we can identify some things that some potential factors that weren't really identified just from sticking with existing literature reviews and sticking your head with keeping your nose in the book with other research studies. And within this, there's a lot of information here. So I want to focus particularly on the protective factors. I think it's something that we don't talk quite enough about. So yes, I think in all of these studies, there were a lot of different risk factors that were noticed, but I also wanted to note that social connectedness was something that was really key within all of these studies. And specifically when we talked with youth, they said for them, especially sometimes in which their phone use was actually taken away or so forth, it actually felt harmful to them, that social media was a space that they were really using to connect with other people, give and receive emotional support, informational support. It was also a space that they were really engaging with other people. They were making plans, finding out about different events in their friend group, within their school, and their community. Some of them were using it as a space for volunteerism and activism, but it was really something that in all of these ways that was something that was really strongly positive for them. And in terms of the risk factors, I'm going to highlight the work of Jackie Nisi, who did a meta-analysis on this topic. And similarly to other people, her work showed that there wasn't a strong association between just amount of use of social media and suicide risk. But what she found is that there were 3 factors that were associated with that. So that was problematic use, which is just kind of use that can interfere with daily life, cyberbullying, And then exposure to self-harm and suicidal content, which could be, kids seeing comments or maybe photos or videos in which self-harm or suicidal content was either depicted or, encouraged in some sort of way. And if we move on to the next slide, I want to circle back to adolescent cyberbullying. And the reason for that is that within that, it's something that is common among youth, and it's also something that within that meta-analysis that had kind of a robust association with suicidal thoughts, behaviors, attempts, non-suicidal self-injury. It's something that is really meaningful to the mental health of adolescents. So talking a little bit more about cyberbullying, I first just wanted to offer a definition. It's defined as willful and repeated harm inflicted through the use of computers, cell phones, and other electronic devices. That's from the Cyberbullying Research Center. And this includes unique elements of social media. The fact that it's 24/7 in nature, it definitely doesn't end when the bell ends at the end of the school day. There's different aspects of anonymity. We don't, people can go online with a screen name that's totally anonymous, and you don't always know the person on the other end of the screen. And it's also there's potential for a broader audience with, a certain hashtag. If we're sharing different ways, we can really reach a larger audience in which one negative, kind of comment can cascade to a bunch of other negative comments. And some of them can be more harsh in nature because we have differences in the way that we respond to people, essentially, when we don't have those facial cues or other things that might stop us if we're in person. And then I also wanted to recognize that this definition could and should include identity-based bullying that targets salient aspects of a physical self, including appearance, gender, and race. Historically, I don't feel like we've done a great job of including that definition when we have either done research or even worked around this topic in different programmatic efforts. And when we do, we can see that this is something that is really meaningful to youth from different vulnerable backgrounds. Keep going. So I wanted to talk a little bit about trends in cyberbullying. So this is the Cyberbullying Research Center does surveys of youth and they have nationally representative samples, and they've been doing this for many years. In 2016, you can see of the different types of bullying, school bullying victimization was definitely highest, followed by cyberbullying victimization. And that was something that increased in schools between 2016 and 2019. But if we look between 2019 and 2021, what happens is kind of interesting. We can see that school-based bullying victimization kind of rapidly decreased. And of course, that was around the time of COVID. Kids were spending a lot less time in school. And we didn't necessarily see that school-based kind of victimization happening as often. But we did see cyberbullying victimization increase at the time that any other form of bullying decreased. And in terms of who experienced it, the rates were highest among younger adolescents, so under 15, and rates were also highest among youth who identified as trans. About a little over a third of them reported experiencing cyber victimization in the month prior to that survey when it was conducted in 2021. And speaking a little bit more about cyberbullying among LGBTQ youth, I first just wanted to acknowledge that, of course, LGBTQ youth experience a number of different minority stressors, victimization in other areas, rejection, non-affirmation, discrimination. And so there's a lot of things that are happening there, but I'm speaking specifically about bullying experiences among LGBTQ youth. There can be some unique things that are not experienced by other groups. So things like gender policing, so policing around one's pronouns or gender expression and so forth. Den naming, which is referring to one's birth name that they may no longer be using, misgendering, and also just other forms of anti-LGBTQ prejudice and discrimination. We know that LGBT youth report cyberbullying nearly 3 times the rate of straight and cisgender youth. And this is something that we're specifically, that I'm specifically interested in focusing on because LGBTQ youth also have a higher rate of suicidal thoughts and behavior, about 4 times the rate of youth who are not LGBTQ. Cyberbullying historically is something that wasn't talked a lot about among youth of color. And I think more recently, Brandisha Tynes and others have done work around this notion of online racial discrimination and really kind of trying to expand the definition of people that people are using and including that. And when we expand this kind of conversation to that, it is something that is commonly reported among youth of color, and specifically Black and Hispanic youth is what most of the research has been done around. There was a daily diary study that was done in 2020 in which they asked Black adolescents to essentially identify and provide a narrative of some of the discrimination experiences that they were having. And they averaged over 5 racial discrimination experiences per day, and those were happening much more commonly online than they were in offline settings. The figure on the right there, or the image, I should say, on the right there is from another study by Brandisha Tynes in which they looked at the actual narratives of some of the online racial discrimination comments that have been made, with the larger words being ones that were used more commonly. So you can see some topics around racism, Black people angry. This was 2015. There were some comments about Zimmerman and so forth. And so acknowledging that there are potentially a lot of, risks or potential negative things that can happen, but there are also positive situations that can happen on social media. What can we do as parents, trusted adults, mentors in the community? What can we do to be helpful to teens? So in thinking about that, I wanted to frame this around some recommendations from the American Association for Suicidology. They released a tip sheet for parents and providers, and I think some of their comments are useful for our purposes as well. So they recommend building an awareness of social media trends and uses. The more that we have some kind of baseline level of knowledge of what's happening on social media and different platforms, the more that we're going to be more, equipped to be able to enter into conversation about that with the teen. Especially for parents, we can think about monitoring access, use, impacts of social media, and particularly through open conversation. We can consider the child's development stage, mental health vulnerability, youth who are younger and have some pre-existing mental health vulnerabilities, maybe have previous history of depression, anxiety, and so forth, are going to potentially be more impacted by some of the negative aspects of social media than youth who don't have those vulnerabilities. You can also think about mitigating exposure to potentially harmful content, specifically content that's really violent or of a sexual nature. It generally probably doesn't make sense for most of us to be regularly exposing ourselves to that. And then we can also recognize both the positives and negative aspects of social media. Even if we are that person who really thinks of social media as something that's mostly destructive, if we enter into a conversation with teens about that in that way, sometimes we don't have a whole lot of buy-in to really have a conversation about that. But if we kind of weigh things equally and really kind of listen and understand perspectives that can be positive and negative, we might be in a better space to talk about that together. And speaking a little bit more about conversations, I think we've talked about that a lot already today, and I think you all might be more expert in this than I am in terms of how to really foster open and honest conversation with teens. But I wanted to talk a little bit more specifically about that in this space. So we know from the social media monitoring literature that engaging in active and supportive discussion with teens is more effective than just restricting teens' use of social media and actually reducing the incidence of media-related risks. And so what I mean by that are exposure to inappropriate content, contact with people who might be considered undesirable, like even adults and so forth that may not have the best intention for teens, and even cyberbullying. So when we enter into these open conversations, it's something that can be more effective at actually addressing some of these risks. Restriction by itself can decrease the amount of time that kids spend online, but not make as huge of a difference in actually changing what they're doing and the risks that they potentially open themselves up to. So these discussions should be developmentally appropriate, recognizing that younger adolescents tend to need more guidance on appropriate media use. How can I use social media in a way that is safe, responsible, private, and so forth. Where older adolescents may have already learned a lot of those lessons, and what might be most useful are to have someone to calmly listen, validate, not jump to potential consequences, and really to offer support. I provided a resource here to Common Sense Media. I'm happy to share my slides. These are all clickable links. That is a great resource. If you don't feel terribly social media savvy, they have tons of different reviews of how social media sites work, how parental monitoring apps work, recommendations for apps at different maturity levels, and so forth. And I also wanted to recognize the importance of really curating a safe and affirming space where teens feel comfortable opening up. We also know from the literature that when a teen opens up about about a negative experience that they're having, that's a stronger, it's a more consistent and reliable predictor of us as adults actually know what's happening to them than other ways that we might try to pry information from them. So really creating that, kind of open space. And of course, this is especially important among LGBTQ youth. I think not just that population, but LGBTQ youth. There's some data to indicate if there's at least one accepting adult, they were 40% less likely to report a suicide attempt in the past year. And that's from a survey from the Trevor Project, which I think really just speaks to the potential that we have to really make an impact in teens' lives when we do create these spaces. And I provided a link here to the Trevor Project, How to Be an Ally, that has some really great information essentially about allyship and essentially how to do that. And these are some tips for teens. I just provided 4 here, but I also have some other resources at the bottom that have some additional, ways that we can think about this and provide tips to teens and tips for having a safe online environment. So one is to check your mood before going on social media. If we're having like a really stressed out day, or more maybe for some of our kids who have some mental health stuff going on, if we're feeling depressed, if we're feeling anxious and so forth, that might not be the day to go on social media. Are going to be more vulnerable to, reacting to some of the things. And, we can think about that in a way that we can be responsive to our moods of when we're going online. We can also take steps to protect private information when we're on public sites. So this might be information that's especially useful for younger kids. Avoid using names, photos, revealing other identifiable information when we're in a public space. Not saying we can't do that in a private space with friends that we know and trust, but more in a public space. We can use account and privacy settings within each device, each app, each network to really control who can contact us and interact with us, and who can read content that we're putting out there. We can take steps to prioritize friends who are supportive and really encourage that, while at the same time taking steps to unfriend, block, or unfollow friends who can be toxic. I really like the unfollow option because I think it offers an opportunity to not necessarily reject someone from your online life in total, but you're just kind of limiting the amount of time, limiting the exposure that you have to things that they can put online that might be toxic. And so forth. And finally, we can develop a relationship with a parent or other trusted adult to talk about online experiences. And I think it's, whoever the adolescent feels comfortable talking to, it's really great to have that kind of relationship. So if something bad does happen, either cyberbullied or so forth, they have already built that trust, so they might feel more comfortable in talking about that. We think that's especially important because we know only about 11% of kids who experience cyberbullying ever report it to an adult. And then in terms of responding to cyberbullying, the first step is really beginning with a stance of supportive listening and validation, and especially for kids who might be victimized, to not jump to consequences or conclusions, but really thinking about and assessing what happened. If a teen is targeted by cyberbullying, if it's something that's, a one-time incident or maybe minor in nature, the general suggestions that might not be true in all contexts are to really suggest ignoring, deleting, or blocking the content. But if it's something that's more repeated and or severe in nature, we can take steps to investigate what happened. Sometimes we can actually document or save correspondence as evidence, so to speak, which in some cases can be useful. We might need that. can consider contacting the content provider to report what happened. Like most social media sites have options to report. You can communicate with the school if the incident involved another student, and sometimes it's necessary to involve law enforcement or seek legal advice when that's necessary, especially if it's something there is a threat of violence or something along those lines. If a student engaged in cyberbullying, I think similarly, we can explore the context of why this could have happened, recognizing that kids who engaged in cyberbullying are also at risk of mental health consequences, and a lot of them may have other mental health vulnerabilities. So taking also that step of listening and validation, encouraging empathy for the other situation, as well as the empathy that we have for their own, and making connections to appropriate resources as needed. And finally, if they witness cyberbullying, the general communication that's helpful is that we appreciate that, one, that they didn't stand by, that they are telling us about it and they're taking steps to not ignore it, and that we know that doing nothing when others are being bullied can possibly encourage that behavior. And there's some additional resources here for how exactly to help youth kind of stand up to cyberbullying. And I think that's all I had. I have a bunch of other resources and so forth that I have a feeling that I need to send those out afterward, but there's a ton of different things on here, including like if you have a kid who experienced cyberbullying, you don't know what to do, consultation lines and so forth, that I'm happy to send out after this event.
Thank you so much, Candace. We wanted to provide a space for some breakout group discussions and then come back. So maybe if you could hold any questions for Candace, we'll give folks about 10 minutes to meet in small groups. And then we'll come back together for some wrap up discussion and any questions that we might like to address. So we just wanted to continue that conversation around creating safe spaces to talk about mental health and social media use for youth, and to hear for you all to have an opportunity to share with one another how you do that in your programs, and also how you're responsive to upsetting incidents that might occur online, how you bridge that conversation with youth, and how adults can be supportive and prevent cyberbullying where possible. So I will put a couple of questions in the chat so that you have them in your breakout groups. And we'll have about 10 minutes to discuss and meet one another in that setting, and then we'll come back and regroup. So, and one of our planning team members will be in each group to help guide the discussion. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the breakout rooms. We'll come back in about 10 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had some good discussions. We just wanted to spend a few minutes to recap and hear from each group about some tips and things you may have spoken about. I can start for our group. I think one thing to add to Candace's conversation was around the constant comparison that happens related to social media and how much that impacts mental health, as well as recognizing in trying to create physical safe spaces for teens. Sometimes the phones make it that youth are always on display. You might not know when someone's taking your photo or a video that they could then post on social media. And so really being mindful of that in the way that we, make rules or expectations around the use of phones in the physical space, safe spaces. Those were two of the areas that we talked about. Also just using social media to post tools and tips around promoting positive mental health and wellness, whether it's mindfulness skills or others, but youth have accessed those from social media from trusted adults. So that's one way of positively using it. So those are a couple of things that came up in our group. I will ask maybe Carol, if you want to share a little bit about what came up in your group.
I would say we talked about the opportunities that organizations are currently supplying for youth to be in safe spaces. And most of the time, what they found is that they're fairly self-directed, that the youth really take advantage of the space and talk. But I think one of the really interesting things that came about in one of the groups was kind of a reconciliation process, in that there was actually a person who was doing the bullying in the group and had a history of bullying someone else in the group. And even though they hadn't necessarily intended to work on that, the person who had been the bully showed a lot of growth in the group and really came to understand what the impact of what he or she was doing on other people. So that was kind of something that they're looking into, maybe reflecting on that and understanding what some of the steps were, because it could happen again and maybe could happen in other organizations too. So that was kind of an exciting thing to learn about.
Sophia, you're below Carol on my screen, so you want to share from your group next?
Sure, by all means. So one of the things that in the beginning when we were talking about safe spaces that came up, that I think a lot of us were like kind of surprised by the conversation about cyberbullying, was that not taking young people's cell phones away is just not healthy. And I was able to share and reflect on the situation that I had with a young person just a few weeks ago about how she really did need to be connected to her teammates, and it created an unhealthy place for her. So really thinking about ways that as adults we can be more intentional to provide direction around ways to use their phone, maybe even talking about how certain sources aren't the most ideal sources to get their information from, and learning about ways to navigate misinformation. And then some of the things we talked about in order to be healthy is also just thinking about how we can promote websites that either talk about poetry or art. Like, what are the things that we like to sign up for that are giving us those good mental stimulation? Like, there's music. I was in a waiting room for a Zoom a couple weeks ago, and they had this amazing song that I like immediately looked up right afterwards. So like, what are those things that'll help young people, and using social media the right way will help to promote those things. And then just a last note, there was a lot of great things we talked about, but one other thing I want to mention is just reminding young people that every action has a reaction. So the way that they use social media will live with them. It takes a minute to maybe say or to write something, but the impact of that is much longer in the end. So I will then, I guess, Michelle, your group will be the next group, right?
Great, thanks. And I'll go really quickly because I know we're running near the end of time. With regard to like safe spaces, we talked about what that might look like in in-person settings as well as virtual, and how it's different to kind of create those safe spaces in those different environments and talk about what that looks like. We also talked about the importance of allowing folks to opt in and opt out as they see fit. So again, really providing youth agency in those spaces and allowing them to lead in a way that feels comfortable to them and participate in a way that feels comfortable to them. In having like conversations regarding consuming social media, etc., is when our group talked about the importance of just having general conversations and icebreakers to kind of warm folks up, and then kind of diving into content from there, so folks kind of had a chance to level set. And then one other thing I wanted to pinpoint, some of the folks in our session were doing like really being very intentional for allowing space. So through chill sessions or having talks with licensed professionals, and it being like that opportunity just to share in a way that was confidential. We talked about with regard to confidentiality, being very transparent and what can be kept confidential and what can't, so that you can have creating that safe space for conversation and knowing like, okay, here's what'll be kept here, here's what can't be, depending on that content. And then last, the importance of creating group norms for those groups when engaging in heavier conversation, if you will.
Great. Sounds like there were a lot of really rich discussions and a lot of great tips that we can certainly compile and share out back with the group as follow-up. In the last couple minutes here, I just wanted to give space if there's any questions specific for Candace, or Candace, if you have anything you wanted to wrap up or say in response to some of the conversations in the small groups.
Yeah, I will. It sounds like really great conversations, and I am just continuing to feel like I'm just grateful if you all are making space for these conversations and other ones of just kind of difficult things that teens are facing. I think, and I appreciated a couple of comments, and there was one that I thought would be maybe useful to comment on, in the note about taking cell phones away. And I wanted to just say, I don't necessarily think that that is necessarily bad in 100% of circumstances. There are situations in which, especially even teens themselves will like want to take a break or like a digital detox. And those can be really reasonable times to do that. For younger kids, I think especially, restrictions can make more sense than for older kids. And it's just knowing the individual kid, their maturity level, their developmental context, their risk, and kind of thinking about it in a nuanced way. I guess is one thing that I thought in reflecting on that, but I don't know if there's other questions that people have.
I see Susan raised her hand. Did you want to ask a question?
No, I did not. I just realized that I had hit my reaction button. I apologize.
That's okay. Does anyone else have any questions? Well, thank you so much. That was such a rich presentation and conversation. We will be sure to share. There's a number of resources around this that Candace put together that we can share back with the group as the follow-on. So be on the lookout for that email. And we do encourage and invite you to register for our next session, which will be on Wednesday, April 6th in the afternoon. It's a little shift in the time because we are looking forward to including youth in that conversation as a youth panel. And so we hope you'll register for that and look forward to hearing from them. There's a link that is also been posted in the chat and a QR code on the screen that we ask that if you could fill out an evaluation for today, we would greatly appreciate it. We'd love to hear your thoughts around today's session, and We're looking forward to continuing this conversation in April and hope you all have a wonderful snowy weekend here in March. And thank you again to Max and Patrick, Kiyomi and Candace for being with us today. It was such a wonderful morning and way to spend a Friday. So thank you so much.